Hello, welcome to PLM Migration Planning 101 for Siemens Teamcenter. My name is Brian Scouten, Director of Technical Presales for ProStep Inc. And today I'll take you through migration planning, what the project looks like, budgeting exercises, and different strategies that you can use to get you going on your migration project for Teamcenter. ProStep's Teamcenter Migration Week is sponsored by the Digital Enterprise Society. Over these sessions, ProStep will cover crucial topics to assist your organization with migrating to Siemens Teamcenter PLM. From planning and validation to data migration techniques, these webinars provide real-world guidance and answers to your most pressing questions around modernizing the complex PLM landscape. The Digital Enterprise Society has an event called the Digital Intersect coming up February 22nd in Troy, Michigan. This one-day event will be an opportunity to network with peers, learn about best practices from industry thought leaders, and discover new technologies from several top vendors serving our industry. The theme this year is the revolution of your digital ecosystem, and there's a great agenda plan to include presentations from Siemens Digital Industries Software, ProStep, Elysium, SimData, Leanon, and several others. Also to note, I'll be giving a presentation entitled Multi-System PLM Integration at the Digital Intersect event on February 22nd. If you're interested in learning strategies to connect siloed product data across core enterprise systems, please join my session. Go to www.digitalenterprisesociety.org to learn more. And thanks again to the Digital Enterprise Society for sponsoring this. ProStep has been a long-term partner with Siemens, going back with their acquisition from UGS and then also UGS before that, and connecting the Teamcenter for over 25 years with OpenPDM and Global X products. So we've got commercial off-the-shelf connectors for Teamcenter, controllers for NX and Teamcenter integration for CATIA, IPEM, SolidWorks, SWIM integration, as well as processes for TC for Sim and a legacy connector for Teamcenter Enterprise. And this is all supporting integration and migration and secure data exchange with the Siemens products and Teamcenter. Something that makes ProStep unique is our wide variety of partnerships, and we're technology partners with a lot of major players within engineering and manufacturing. So that includes like Dassault Systems and Siemens, PTC, but then also like IBM for ALM, MSC, others, right? Aris, and maybe that's requirement systems, ERP systems, MES systems, other types of systems as well to really kind of bridge the different domains together and provide that type of interoperability. Technology partnerships include licensing for API, so that when you get one of these connectors from ProStep, a commercial off-the-shelf connector, we're supporting that, with the back end and getting releases of that product in order to test those connectors out and build new adapters for new versions and things like that. Also like to call out ProStep IVIP. This is our nonprofit sister company. And they lead standards within engineering data exchange and interoperability. So that's things like Step 242 and driving that through ISO as an organization, but also long-term archiving and retrieval. The LOTAR group over in Europe is led by the IVIP Association. So both those important in generating neutralized data and storing it for long-term archiving. And sometimes that can be used as a strategy in migration as well. Let's talk about aligning migration with the rest of your plan. And that might be a plan for a new introduction of PLM. It could be that you have a merger and acquisition or a combination of all of those. And you have to figure out how to align the data. Well, migration maybe is just part of that. And there might be a grand PLM implementation plan that has other functionality, other systems involved with. And typically that starts with an as-is analysis. And there's no migration as that component. But going into the to-be definition, you need to start thinking about what type of migration strategy you're going to use. And that could be maybe an ETL type strategy or a coexistence type strategy, how you're going to get the data in the system so the users can use it without disruption effectively. And then when you make a system selection, you might already know this, you need to start your migration planning with that. And so when you're understanding what the system looks like, what the data models are that are going to be involved, what functionality it has, you need to understand what data needs to be migrated in there in order to make that totally functional. And then when you're doing the implementation, do the validation and verification of the migration as well, and the implementation of the migration processes. And with the go live preparation, do the migration dry runs. That might be a wholly end-to-end load of data to ensure that the data is going to fit in there correctly and be functional and usable, within the system. And then finally, with go live, that's going to be the execution, or really the final stage of the execution of the migration. And that could be encompassing all the data or just the Delta update of just the latest data. But making sure that the data is there for day one of the go live. And important to this whole process is that migration is just a component, and it's a vital component to go live, but make sure it fits within that schedule. You can sometimes augment the schedule with maybe a sprint plan that has overlap between rollouts of functionality within your system, and then maybe 2 weeks later, the incorporation of that within the migration. So you can stagger the developments to make sure that migration is a core component to any of the new implementation going forward, and that will give you success in the end. So with migration, we start with requirements, and core to this is differentiating the requirements for decommissioning your legacy system and introducing your new system. And then maybe you can see what filters out, between that. A lot of times when we start these migration discussions, we come in and they say, I need every piece of data that's within the source system loaded into the new system. Well, that might not, be feasible, and quite frankly, it might not be necessary. There might be other ways that you could move that data, other systems you can put it into. Maybe it's just legacy data that you don't need anymore, or a format of that data, maybe one derived output is sufficient in order to accomplish what its goals are. So think about what needs to be extracted. Do you need all those versions, all the iterations? Maybe you just need the latest released, revision. Do you need all the history of the changes of each individual piece of data? And there's probably a nice balance there of, oh, I need, what each revision is, but maybe not all the intermediate changes. How do you handle other data types in the system that the data is coming from? So types that aren't readily transferable, like tasks that were accomplished within that system. That could be things like sign-offs or individual user tasks. Those aren't things that can then just be ported to the new system generally, because you have a different user there that has different timestamps, and they just didn't do it in that system. So you can kind of roll those up, and there's strategies that you can use, like taking approval checklists, and you can go through and document on a change. Here was the workflow, and it has this approval history, and we can generate a PDF of what that change approval was, and then move that along with the change itself. So trying to document some of that workflow history. And then in the new PLM, what do you need in order to go live? And typically people are working on just new programs, so they're looking for the latest and greatest. That could be not just the release stuff, but the WIP stuff as well, the work in progress data. Could be that they only need the top 20 programs of data within the CAD, and they could maybe utilize the other CAD they might need for backup, but in order to actually use the system, focus on the most valuable data and then maybe come back later and be able to pull through some of that other data. And you can pull through some of that other data through an alternative archiving strategy. That could be using LOTAR, long-term archiving, or another way to decommission the data without using the new PLM and adding complication there, especially if there's a significant amount of transformation or data cleanup that needs to go into it. One thing that normally is not approached within migration, but should be considered, is an alternative archiving strategy. Do you want to modernize all your CAD data and fix all of that, and then need to re-modernize that in another 20 years when you're going to this process again, and maybe don't have the hardware and software to support that? Or alternatively, if you need to keep the data around, you can transform it to like a step 242 format, and then use an offline repository that then enables that data to be used within a system in the future that doesn't need legacy hardware and software support, and doesn't then also need transformation into one proprietary format from another, right? So you don't need to keep all those CAD seats around. And if this is something that you're thinking of because you've got to keep this data for 50 plus years, then the archiving strategy should be incorporated into your migration. So you take over what you need in order to make your business move forward, but then also factor in archiving of that legacy data so that you can use it in the future, but it's more controlled and manageable. So there's multiple methodologies you can use for migration. The first one, and the one we generally use, especially for small and medium migrations, is the ETL style approach, and that's extract, transform, and load. That means you export all the data from the source system. You can then do any transformation of the data. That could be translation of the binaries or generating visualization. And then also mapping of the database data into the new target format. And then load, meaning import that data in all the data at once into the new PLM system. You can do that in multiple steps. Sometimes if there's a larger data set, we'll do what we call an initial load. That might take longer, and do all the data maybe to a certain cutoff date. And then maybe load what the just the delta update in order to kind of complete that last months of data over a weekend, so that it makes it easy for systems to go live. The other way we can do it is transactional, and what is this is more of a integration approach to migration. And what you do is define packages of data. Now that package could be like a whole division's worth of data or a whole program's worth of data, and then move just packages at a time over. Now, the disadvantage to this is that sometimes you need to synchronize changes and migrate the ownership of data between systems, and go both ways, because there's still data and there's still users within both systems. Now, the advantage to this, and this is a big upside, is that you can slowly move your users over to the new system, and you don't have to move all the users at once and cut it off. Now, so there's more work to do here. There's more transactions, there's more data quality checks, but you can slowly incorporate and adopt that new system and not have total shock and maybe issues with that shock of adoption that you might have. And so transactional is a good approach if you're trying to take very large migration projects on, especially for multiple systems and source systems. So what are the first steps in a migration? If you called us tomorrow, what process would we go through? And that's on this slide here. So if you called us, we would ask a little bit about the overall scope of the migration, what the source systems are, what data's in there, what type of conversion you might need to make. And then from there, we would develop a questionnaire that we would then send over to you, and then you would identify that volumes of data, types of data, versions of systems, versions of databases, how many users, where they are, if there's replication volumes, all that kind of stuff, right? And then we would use that questionnaire and go back and forth and then kind of fill in some of the details to get a good handle on the scope of data, meaning, what types are there, and then also the volume of data, like the file counts and business object counts that are within the systems. So with that, then we can develop a really good process and proposal of how to do the migration. That migration then goes into a discovery workshop where we can then really look at the data and then also evaluate what the mapping, business processes and constraints around that would look like. And then from there, formulate specifications for mapping and process strategy for the migration, as well as a timeline and all the user stories that might need to go into development within the migration kickoff. So in general, this is where we start with migrations. ProStep typically follows this type of migration process model in work packages. And that starts with the specification that came from that questionnaire and workshop. And then, includes a mapping document and a process specification. We might also do data evaluation and process and performance testing. Depending on what the needs are, we can test specific CAD translation tools or processes that might go in there, cleanliness of the data, and do evaluations on cleanliness. Then after that, we figure out what we think is the right process. Then we go ahead and design and build that and install the tools and then develop the scripts and develop the tests for those as well. Execute the system integration and batch tests. And after the batch tests, we should be fully confident that we can execute 100% migration rehearsal. So then we go into what we call a rehearsal cycle. So after the batch tests, our developers are confident in the process, but the rehearsal cycle is testing both the process and the data. So we will execute normally between 2 and 4 full data migration rehearsals. And you go through every piece of data, you execute the data through the migration engine. And then if there's any discrepancies or any issues with it, then you can identify it during the rehearsal. So, the first one, maybe we'll do a limited set of data, maybe not 100%. Second one, do 100% of the data, and normally 98% of it goes through. But by the third or fourth one, we should see near 100% data, and then can do little, remediations, maybe a little data cleanup here or there. Fix those little edge cases in the migration and make sure that it's perfect. After the rehearsals are done, then we go through and execute and run the production migration, generate all the reports for it, make sure that all the data is correct, and you can go live in your new system. During the execution of a migration process, and this could be ETL, but also transactional, typically there's 4 phases. The first one being that we're going to let everybody know that we're moving the data, make sure you've got it all saved in the system, and this is all scheduled and prepared, and make sure the infrastructure is there. In the pre-migration phase, we validate the infrastructure, we do kind of smoke testing on the process tools, ensure that all the preparation is done. Sometimes there's accounts that need to be made read-only in systems, closing out tasks, things like that. And it depends on the system what the needs are. And then in the migration phase, we perform the data migration, so execute those scripts. And then from the execution of that, we're generating all sorts of KPIs and logs and issues. And then finally, we can compile all those and then, go live in the post-migration. If there is a significant amount of issues, we always have a plan to fall back and then, revert to the initial state just in case. But 99% of the time that doesn't happen. We move forward, and then there's probably going to be a few issues here and there that we can then correct, and we know what those are, so move forward with what those are. And so in a ETL style approach, this might be a large volume of data, and transactional approach, this might be a smaller set of users that are going through, but largely kind of a similar process in neither. So this is an example migration plan for a larger migration project. Migrations do span different amounts of time based on the volume and the complexity of the project, and some are just a couple months and some are many years. So depending on the scale, it might be different. And there are ways to compress that, and there are ways that we can make it easier on business by pushing it out longer as well. But in this one, it's an ETL style migration. You see at the top, there's a definition phase that includes the specification and the infrastructure setup. So we get all the servers together for test systems, as well as where we're going to script and export and import connectors and things like that. We then go through and implement, in this case, in an agile approach, but we could do this in a waterfall style approach as well, and do the development of the scripts. Do the testing, the system integration testing, and then the rehearsals, and do kind of minor, solution adjustments through the rehearsals, and really check every individual piece of data to make sure that those are being processed effectively. With that, testing being done, we'll execute the final migration and move on. And you see that the infrastructure at the bottom kind of validates that sometimes you can get away with just a single migration server, but in other cases you might want to have multiple environments in order to run like migration rehearsals and development at the same time, especially if you've got some overlapping functionality or there's different source systems and you're kind of moving from one source to another in order to get different migration efforts out the door. So there is, some validity to having multiple environments, for infrastructure. And generally, we'll move the test infrastructure and point it to the production in order to execute a production migration. So, normally only one or two, especially in a smaller project. In larger projects, sometimes more infrastructure is needed, though. Budgeting and resource planning for your migration. And this is boiling down to three big items: time, people, and systems. And then breaking those down with time, there's more time due to data complexity. And that might be different types of data that you're moving into the system. That could be different CAD formats, or you've got configuration data and change data, multiple BOM scenarios. Each of those might need to have more mapping, more script development, more testing and execution that's going along with that. So that drives time. Data volume drives time as well. So the execution of any of the rehearsals, if you're running an ETL migration, you run 100% of that data. So the more data you have, the more data that needs to be pushed through the migration pipe. And then, resulting in longer run times. And when you do 3 of those plus a production migration, that adds up and really equals more time overall within the migration plan. Also, depending on the amount of volume or your business tolerance for downtime, we want to try and keep it within a kind of a weekend time frame for an ETL migration. That might lead to an initial load and a delta type of scenario, in which case you would need to actually script both of those and test them, as well within the migration rehearsal. So there's more testing that goes on there and development. And then finally, data quality. So you come with issues, maybe there's bad CAD data that doesn't open up and you need to have that fixed. That's released data. You need to go back to engineering. Those are sometimes drivers of cost and time there. On the people side, most important is migration leaders. Overall, migration is not an exciting thing, so you need to make sure you've got good leadership that can really push this as an activity to make sure it's a focal point that it gets done. You need migration technical development and execution people that are going to drive, the development of the scripts and the testing of the scripts. They're going to be involved in the mapping. They understand the data models of all the different systems that are involved in the processes as well. You need business office SMEs that can work with the different divisions and groups that are going to be using the systems to drive the requirements for what the mapping might be, and also to coordinate the data cleanup with those different divisions depending on who owns that data. You need SMEs that understand Teamcenter and mapping. You need SMEs that understand the source system data. You need migration acceptance testers and also IT resources so that if systems need to be restarted or you run through a rehearsal and you've got to clear out the database and Teamcenter in order to load more data in for the next rehearsal, we're going to need IT resources in order to perform those types of operations. And on the system side, we're going to need a dedicated at least one migration server and many times more than one. So we can gain some efficiency by parallelizing these tasks, especially with CAD data. And that could be CAD data translation, CAD data export, or CAD data import. In many cases, those are expensive performance-wise in order to go through the CAD API that needs to be used in order to load the data. And so we would rely on parallelization, different servers in order to improve the performance of that. You also need a file space. So that would be the total volume of files that you're exporting from all your source systems, as well as the volume of the databases that you're going to be exported. And then you need to be able to attach that file storage to the different migration servers so that you can execute that. Translation servers, if you're doing any of that, as well as software and the process for handling that. And licenses for migration software, for any third-party translation software, named users for different accounts, so administrators, but also testing users, so that you can test out Teamcenter, make sure it's validated, or the source systems to take a look at the data you need to export, things like that. You need the test systems. So we recommend exact duplicates of the production system in order to run through these processes. And that does a couple things. That enables you to make sure that you can run through 100% of the data. So you need to have all the files, within the source system at least in order to execute that. And on a target system, you need the database in order to understand, what conflicts you're going to hit when you run through the production execution or the rehearsal of the execution as well. And you need to refresh these systems, with the IT resources. Remember that ProStep's here to help. We've got hundreds of consultants, and we've been doing this for a long time. We've got specialized tools for migration, and we are interoperability experts, and we know all these different systems and how to move data between them. So give us a call or send us an email if you've got a migration project. We'd be happy to hear about it and maybe, at least shed a little bit more strategy or approach on how we would do it, or help you out and try and get that. And again, we'd like to thank the Digital Enterprise Society on their co-partnership for this webinar series and Teamcenter Migration Week. Digital Enterprise Society has an event called the Digital Intersect coming up February 22nd in Troy, Michigan. This one-day event will be an opportunity to network with peers, learn about best practices from industry thought leaders, discover new technologies from several of the top vendors serving our industry. And the theme of this year's event is the revolution in your digital ecosystem. There's a great agenda planned to include presentations from Siemens Digital Industry Software, ProStep, Elysium, SimData, LeanOn, and several others. As a reminder, I'll be giving a presentation entitled Multi-System PLM Integration. My talk focuses on strategies to connect siloed product data across core enterprise systems. So if seamlessly integrating your PLM landscape is of interest to you, or you want to learn ways to maximize the value of your existing PLM infrastructure, please join me at my scheduled session. And with that, I thank you for attending the webinar. Again, I'm Brian Scouten. Feel free, send an email or give us a call, and we'd be happy to hear about your migration project.